Assalamu alaikum students. Today in history we will discuss the second part of the topic Zulfiqar Bhutto. In this topic we will discuss a few of the reforms of Zulfiqar Bhutto, just like industrial reforms, agricultural reforms, and educational reforms. So, first of all, the industrial reforms uh, imposed by Zulfiqar Bhutto after taking office. So, Zulfiqar Bhutto wanted to promote economic growth and further to bring inflation rate down uh, level. So, a major part of his economic policies was the introduction of the policy of nationalization. So he took so many industrial units and around about the 70 major industrial units under government control. In this regard, the sugar, cotton, vegetable oil, and rice industries, together with the banking and insurance sectors, were taken under government control. So, these changes were designed to help the government to control industrial output and channel investment into industrialization, means to improve the industrial uh, output. Secondly, to raise the workers' living and working standards, including the provision of cheap housing schemes. Next objective of nationalization of the industrial sector was to allow the workers to set up unions so that they could properly safeguard their rights and furthermore uh, to even out the inequalities that had collected most of the industrial wealth into a few hands. So, just to uh, distribute the um, industrial wealth into more hands and just to avoid the concentration of wealth into few hands. So 20 industrial houses own 80% of the Pakistan's large scale industry and to create wealth to help funds. Another objective was to create wealth to help funds other government reforms. And next objective of nationalization policy was to raise the popularity of Pakistan People's Party with the urban areas uh, because the supporters of the Pakistan People's Party were more in the in rural sector. So this last objective was the political one. However, the nationalization policy faced many problems and difficulties. Government had to face a lot of problems to implement its policies, just like Pakistan's education system was not producing sufficient educated workers to take managerial position in the industries under the Federal Ministry of Production, and capable factory owners were often replaced by the civil servants with little understanding of commerce. Secondly, the federal ministry had a huge job to do. There was a lot of work to do, furthermore. So, coordinating nationalization across the country, it was a big task. The system often bogged down in bureaucratic muddle. Uh, so the expected targets were not to be achieved. Thirdly, the changes took place at a time when the world was going through a recession. It was a time period when the world markets were not at a good verge, they were suffering economically. So the newly nationalized industries in Pakistan faced a declining demand for their goods. So in keeping with reduced demands across the world, private companies were being forced to close. It was another setback. So uh, private sector was forced to close, and the nationalized industries um, uh, continued to operate. Now we will discuss the second part of reforms, agricultural reforms. During the time period of Ayub Khan, the ceiling was had been imposed uh, uh, on 500 acres of irrigated and 1000 acres of non-irrigated land. Now, during the time period of Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto, um, uh, that slab was being changed. The ceiling on the land ownership had been reduced to 250 acres in case of irrigated lands, um, and 500 acres in case of unirrigated lands. Uh, Irrigated lands were the lands, agricultural lands, what were being irrigated by the river or canal waters, and unirrigated lands were those who were irrigated by the rain water. So the surplus land could be sold to the smaller peasant farmers. So the surplus land obviously could be sold to the smaller peasants. Land would also be available to allow many people to own their own farms for the first time. Uh, but unfortunately, Bhutto's reforms were undermined by the cunning of big landowners. Many of them had anticipated Bhutto's reforms and had transferred some of their land holdings to the members of their other family members. Other landowners transferred land to the trusted tenants and then leased it back on long lease terms. So even when where such measures had not been carried out, uh, there remained the power of personal influence or bribery to persuade officials to overlook transgressions to the new laws. Bhutto wanted to give tenants security of tenure of the land they farmed. So the landowners again undermined the impact of the reforms. In advance of the introduction of the measures, there was mass eviction of tenants from uh, farms to prevent them receiving security of tenure. Bhutto's government also uh, underestimated the influence of landowners in their community. If a landowner didn't want to sell to the tenant, it was extremely difficult for the tenant to stand up against the landowner or to raise finance to buy the land, and if necessary, find the funds to fight a legal case in the courts against the landowner. So it was also true that many landowners use their social position and influence to persuade revenue officers to record land as owner cultivated, when eventually actually it was in the hands of tenants. Now we discuss the educational reforms. Obviously, Bhutto's government was concerned about education, and they wanted to rise the literacy rate officially, and the same thing was being guaranteed in the Constitution of 1973. So Bhutto's government outlined eight ambitious goals. The objective were to eradicate ignorance, and to provide education for all, including women and mentally impaired and illiterate adults. Thirdly, to ensure that the school curriculum meets Pakistan's social, economic, and political demands and needs. Further, to ensure uniformity of education in each subject in every school and college in the country. Further, to raise the self confidence of the common man, and to raise the aspirations for higher education among the youth community, to develop each person's personality and potential. And its aim was to develop our Pakistani culture and identity and national pride. There were certain problems in the same way on the way to implement the educational reforms in the country. The administration needed to coordinate the reforms was not yet in place. Both the planning and administration of the system were introduced with efficiency where there were sufficient administrators, but in other areas it had little impact. So some areas they received very positive impact, rather others. Only 13% of the government education budget was allocated to primary schools, and so implementation was very difficult. Many people in rural areas didn't see the need for education or literacy. It was a major and general problem. Uh, Even the people knew that their kids were being provided the education free of cost. So there was not the issue of for being issue of affording. So uh, even then, many people, especially in the rural areas, they were not in the favor of sending their kids to schools. Rather, they were favoring to send their kids to workplace or to earn. So there was a drop in the standard of education in many of the selective schools that had been nationalized as well. Furthermore, education, obviously, it is a fact that education takes time. So it was not possible to change the curriculum and to train the teachers and to provide the necessary equipment in a very short span of time. So consequently, even after 5 years, the literacy rate had surprisingly not risen by more than 1%. Students, in the next lecture, we will discuss health and social reforms and the administrative reforms of Zulfiqar Bhutto with the reasons of the downfall of Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto, inshallah.